Hi, welcome back. So I have created two APIs. One is to return all users, and the second one is to register a user. Now the problem I have is that the register API does not have any constraint. It does not have any validation. And because of this, anyone can create a user without any username or a password, or they can create a user with age, let's say 12, right? If I hit send, you can see it has created a user and the status is 201 created. If I go ahead and retrieve all users, you can see that malicious user is there as well. Now to implement the validations, what we have to do is we have to use a package which is a Hibernate Validator. So let me show you what I mean. As you can see, I have already generated a Spring Boot application and opened it into IntelliJ IDE, and I have created some classes as well. Let me first show you what dependencies we would need. So when you are generating a Spring Boot application, you need to add two dependencies. First dependency is Spring Web, because we have created the REST API. And the second one is the actual validation library, which is Hibernate Validator. This Hibernate Validator is actually an implementation of JSR 3.0 Jakarta Bean Validator. This JSR 3.0 is actually a specification which only gives you an interface and annotations and what those interface and annotations should do. This Hibernate Validator is actually an implementation of those specifications. You can read more about this JSR 3.0 from Google. Now, once you have generated, open up in your IDE. As you can see, I already have, and let me just walk you through the classes I have created. So the first class is this user controller, which actually exposes one REST endpoint, which is API user, which I just demonstrated. And I have created two endpoints there. One is for the get mapping and the other is for post mapping. Get mapping returns all users, and post mapping actually register a new user. In this project, I'm not using any database. Everything is mock. As you can see in user service class, I have created a user list and have some mock data there, which user service class has two methods. One returns all users and one actually registers a user, which basically adds the user into a user list. Now, to have the validations, to have the constants, what we have is we have some annotations which we can put on our user DTO. Why user DTO? Because that's the object which user passes through via API for registration, right? So whenever user passes this data, we will tell Spring that, hey, whenever user passes this data for this DTO, make sure that it is validated. And what will be the constraints for the validation? We have to mention inside this DTO. Okay, so let me introduce first annotation. The first annotation for validation I would like to use for username is not blank. As you can see, with not blank, it will make sure that the username is not null or empty, right? I can also provide it a message that whenever it is null or empty, what error message I should show to the user. I can show that username can't be empty, right? Similar for password, what I want is I don't want it to be empty or blank. I can say password can't be empty. And also I want to have a constant that the characters in password, the minimum characters I want is 8. So what I can do is I have an annotation called size, and it has minimum and maximum attributes. At this point, I will only use minimum and I will provide 8. So this will be the minimum constraint, minimum size for my password. And the message I would like for the user is password can't be lower than 8 characters. And for age, what I can do is I can add a min annotation, which actually lets me define a value, the minimum value for this integer, for this number. I want 18. I want my user to be 18 years old at least. Perfect. And the message I want for this is user can't be younger than 18. You can add some more descriptive messages. These are just for demonstration and all of this stuff. Now to tell Spring that, hey, you need to validate this user DTO object, we have to add one more annotation, which is valid annotation. That's all we need to do. Let's restart the project and see how it goes. Okay, project is running. Now let's make the same call. And as you can see, we got 400 bad requests, and in logs, you can see we have a message for DTO age, and we have a user can't be younger than 18. And we have other messages as well. As you can see, password can't be lower than 8 characters, right? So we have all of those validations here. Now, what I want is, I don't want to see these errors in my log. I want to give these useful messages to the client, to the user, so that it knows that what went wrong and they can fix it, right? But here I am only seeing this message. So what I can do here, if you observe the logs, we have this method argument not valid exception. And what we can do now is we can handle this exception, and based on this exception we can return a meaningful response to the user. Right now it is in the logs, but once we handle this exception, we will have access to these fields and these messages, and we can get these fields names and messages and return those to the user so that they are shown as a response to the user of an API. Let's do that. I'm going to create a method, a public method, which will return a map of string key, and the value will be list of strings. Why list of strings? I will show you in a second. And the name will be handle exceptions. And an argument, we would accept method argument exception. Perfect. Now we need to tell Spring that, hey, this is the method you have to call whenever you encounter method argument not valid exception, right? To do so, we have to add an annotation over this method, which is exception handler, and inside exception handler, we need to define the exception class itself. And when we send a response to the user, I want the response status to be bad request. So I would define HTTP status as bad request. Now we have these exceptions here. What we can do now is, in method argument not valid exception, we have a method called get binding results, right? So we can get this binding results, and inside we have this method called get field errors, which actually returns a list of field errors, right? Let me insert into a field for better visual. Now let me do a loop over it. Now here what I can do is, I have each field error, and with each field error I have access to the field name itself. So this get field actually returns the name of the field. So it can be a username, it can be password, it can be age, right? So I will retrieve that. And also I have access to default message via method get default message. This will be the message that we have defined. If we do not define the message, we will have a default message which will be provided by Hibernate Validator itself. What we want to do next is that we need to put these two values inside the map, and we return the map so that these values are visible to the user inside a client, right? So let's do that. What I will do now is I will try to get this field name errors list. I will check if this errors list is null. If it is null, which means this is the first time I am getting this field name, and I will just add an error list there. And for this error list, I will add the error message, and at the end I will just add this error list into the map for this field name and error list. Perfect. Now let's restart the project and see. Project is running. Let's run the same request, and as you can see, we are getting 400 bad requests, and we have password field, and we have this relevant messages for username and age as well. Password cannot be lower than 8 characters. Now let's add a user, let's say ABC, and password I would add just 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. Okay, perfect. Now as you can see, there is no username error because we have provided a username, but for the password, the first error is gone, right? And now we have the second error, which is 8 characters, right? So let's give 8 characters. Okay, now password is satisfied. Now we have the validation for age, which says user can't be younger than 18. Okay, let's give it 18 or maybe 19. Perfect. As you can see, now a user is created. We have got 201 created. Let's verify if this user is created. So I have written all user, and as you can see, this ABC user is created. Perfect. So that's all for this tutorial. I hope you liked it. Consider subscribing.